Hello and welcome. My name is Stephanie DiPetrillo, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our TOD in your downtown forum, Gentle Density and Unlocking the Missing Middle in Housing. I am especially excited about today's topic and to hear from our speakers. I am thrilled that for the first time we're holding this event here in Newark at the new headquarters of New Jersey Transit rather than at Rutgers in New Brunswick. And for those of you who do not know, I lead the NJTOD project. NJTOD is primarily, but obviously not only, an online resource that highlights transit-friendly planning and explores the potential for development and redevelopment near transit facilities, particularly those in New Jersey. We do this through research, by highlighting best practices, and by sharing local problem-solving experiences. This project is made possible through a long-standing partnership between Rutgers, Allen M. Voorhees Transportation Center, and the Transit-Friendly Planning Program here at New Jersey Transit. And I am especially pleased to kick off this event, which is our second TOD in your downtown forum of 2025, which also marks the 20th anniversary of this partnership. Today's topic is especially meaningful to me on a personal level. It makes me think of my grandparents. My father's family was settled in North Jersey, and my mother's family in the Bronx. And they were both families were able to become homeowners by purchasing two-family homes, which allowed them to take in some rental income and to expand into space as their families grew. These kinds of housing exist throughout our region, but it has been increasingly difficult to build them over the last 25 years. And we all know the reason why. It's because we have favored single-family homes over missing middle housing. So this panel is to allow us to explore how to change that. As someone trained in economics, architecture, and urban planning, I am frequently reminded about how difficult it is for people to visualize how housing can be added to neighborhoods gently and incrementally in ways that meets the needs of households of all sizes and incomes without overwhelming existing communities. And that is why it is so important for we as planners and people who care about vibrant, livable places to learn to communicate clearly and effectively about how to do this work. I am proud, and I realize I'm not advancing any slides. So that's a slide about NJTOD. We can go back. I am proud to continue our TOD in your Downtown Forum series in collaboration with Downtown New Jersey. A big thank you to our panelists and our moderator, Courtney Mercer, CEO of Mercer Planning Associates and Treasurer of Downtown New Jersey. And of course, a thank you to our partners at Transit-Friendly Planning Program at New Jersey Transit. We are recording the event, as you can see. We have continuing ed credits, which have been arranged for this session. And with that, I'd like to turn over the podium to Michael Swan, Assistant Director of Transit-Friendly Planning at New Jersey Transit.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Swan, as Stephanie mentioned, Assistant Director of Transit-Friendly Planning here at New Jersey Transit. So we welcome you all to our new town hall, which we're very excited to host this event here for the first time. TFP is unique, Transit-Friendly Planning. We've been around for approximately 3 decades now at a transit agency, focused on land use, the intersection of land use and transit. And what's interesting, as a statewide transit agency, we work in communities of all shapes and sizes across this state. We're also very community focused and have developed numerous resources for those that we serve across the state. You'll see up here on the screen our transit-friendly planning guide. That's really our guiding principle for the work that we do across the state. So it has recommendations related to obviously development, design, but also access, circulation, parking, placemaking, and active transportation. But after that was released in 2022, we started hearing more and more about gentle density, missing middle housing. The housing crisis is only getting worse, unfortunately, across this state and across the nation. And so we felt this was a great opportunity to come up with a new community resource, which is, as you see there on the screen, the Gentle Density and Missing Middle Housing Guide. So we hope that this will be a resource for communities across the state. The more and more we learn about missing middle housing, we realize that it is a solution to several problems in communities across the state. Most importantly, hopefully addressing the housing crisis to some degree. And then gentle density is really great because it's a win-win in many communities in terms of respecting the existing scale, the existing form, but trying to increase housing density, hopefully near transit, which is our end goal, is to hopefully increase ridership on New Jersey Transit. So today we have practitioners from across the state, from our urban centers like Newark, our town centers such as Metuchen. Many of the communities that we serve range from obviously urban centers all the way down to our rural places. And we feel that the recommendations in both guides are applicable to any community across New Jersey. So I will pass it off to our wonderful moderator from downtown New Jersey, Courtney Mercer.
Wrong way. All right. There we go. Hi. I'm Courtney Mercer with Mercer Planning Associates, but also the treasurer of downtown New Jersey, and that's the hat I am wearing today. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of this important conversation about missing middle and the connection to TOD and downtown economic development. So I would be remiss if I didn't do a real quick plug for downtown New Jersey. We're an education and advocacy organization all about downtown economic development. We provide technical assistance. We have newsletters. We do an annual conference, educational programming every other month, quarterly, something to that effect. So if you're not familiar, please do check us out at downtownnj.com. So now to today's topic. When we're talking about missing middle housing, I actually appreciate, Stephanie, you put something in my head. I couldn't have afforded my home in Jersey City, but for the rental income of that second unit there. So it really does provide an important aspect to get people into communities. It's the housing that once formed the backbone of our walkable mixed-use communities, and unfortunately now zoning codes have kind of zoned it away. From an economic development standpoint, bringing back missing middle housing is not just about housing choice, it actually is a catalyst for revitalization. When more people can afford to live near downtown, close to jobs, transit, and services, we see stronger foot traffic to small businesses, more stable local tax base, and reduced infrastructure costs per capita. It supports the whole 15-minute city model that prioritizes convenience, sustainability, and livability. It also helps address workforce needs. Downtown businesses rely on employees who are increasingly unable to afford to live where they work. Missing middle housing fills a critical affordability gap, enabling diverse range of households that contribute to the downtown economy. And so that's why we're here and a part of this conversation. So today we're going to explore market trends and policy solutions, and I hope we keep the core in mind that missing middle housing is not just a land use issue, it's a powerful tool for equitable economic development and a sustainable future. So with that, we have a great panel. Adam is going to kick us off and give you, in case you don't know what missing middle housing is, a primer on it. Do you want to go from there or up here? Okay. So thank you, and here we go.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, that's all of us. You're going to hear us talk a little bit more. Let's talk about gentle density in New Jersey a little bit. So I want to start by defining a couple of terms. Missing middle housing. Opticos, a lot of credit to them. They really pioneered this idea in the sort of professional world. Most recently, I hope most of you have sort of seen this diagram. I think it's a very good illustration of what we're talking about. But the key part of this is that missing middle housing is the product. It is the housing. It is the thing. Whereas gentle density is the policy. Okay, and it's a pretty important distinction, and we put this in the guide, this nice little diagram that really talks about sort of the housing type, which is, single family housing and missing middle housing, the strategies, and then the eventual outcomes, which get to a lot of what Courtney had just talked about. So, I think it's really important when we're talking about a lot of these strategies to start with a question about why are you even considering this as an option? And for every one of your communities, I think the answer is going to be very different. And as a result, your strategy or your approach is going to be different. Housing shortage may be something that's very important to your community. This is a graph of housing production. Everybody knows what happened in 2008. There was a huge decline. I think one thing to really pay attention to here is that after the 2008 financial crisis, there was a big shift in production towards more multifamily housing. So the tracking on this is a little wonky. It really revolves around sort of single units, 2 to 4 units, and then 5 or more units. But I think a lot of you probably have the experience of seeing a lot more larger multifamily housing being constructed sort of post-recession. The other thing that you might be thinking about is housing costs. All right, so this is housing price index for New Jersey. As you can see, again, there was a sort of lead up to the bubble in 2008, and then a really steep incline after that. And there have been a lot of metro areas that have seen really, really significant increases in their housing costs. So maybe that's a driver for your community. Demographic changes may be another thing that you should be paying attention to. I got to go back and look this up, but there was some in 1960, the ideal family size was 7 kids. That terrifies me. It's just a totally different world. But housing was all built around that idea, right? The market was responding to the current ideas and demands of what housing should be. That shifted a lot. Married, no kids. Single, no kids. No more kids, right? That's a problem that we're all having. But there's a big shift around that, and that is changing housing needs and demands. I think the other thing that we're not talking about here, but I hope we'll engage with a little bit, is the work from home situation, right? That is also shifting a little bit what housing demands and needs are, and maybe making some of those larger homes actually a little bit more viable. All of this gets to what I think of as housing choice. And there are a lot of different things that you can think of in housing choice. The size of the house, the number of bedrooms, the tenure, whether you're renting or owning, the amenities, location, the cost obviously is a big part of this. I like to joke, some of you may look at that first picture with the nice green lawn and think, man, that's just the ideal home. That gives me anxiety. I hate cutting the lawn. I hate being out there. I joke with my dad, he's got a snowblower. I shovel about 10 square feet of sidewalk every day, when that happens. So, but then the other side of that is that large, big multifamily structure. I think a lot about my grandmother who moved into an apartment like that from a neighborhood, and she just called it an empty hallway. It can feel really sort of isolating for other people. And so there are a lot of other options out there, some of those things actually from New Jersey and in Metuchen, which Chris can talk to. So we put together this gentle density guide for missing middle housing in collaboration with New Jersey Transit. I'm not going to get into all of it today. These are all the sort of sections that are there. What I really want to focus on are the illustrative examples, the planning and zoning consideration, and the implementation program. So we put together what I hope are some very lovely, accessible pictures of about 10 missing middle housing types. The idea here is to create a framework, some illustrative examples that you can take to your community and talk to about, oh, I like this part about it, this is interesting, how would this work? All of these are showing sort of front parking, so coming in on a driveway and then parking in the rear. The standard we've used is 1 parking space per unit. There's certainly some opportunities to reduce that in a lot of communities. But there may be communities where there's going to be demand for more of that, and that's something to really think about when you're looking at these. But the goal here, again, is to use these as a starting point for conversation, but also we've included a lot of information there that if you are going to go through the process of updating your zoning, you've got a starting point for those numbers. The other thing that we've put in there is a lot of information about the sort of what we call planning and zoning considerations. So this is, you're moving through the gentle density process. You're trying to think through how you're going to get from where you are now to where you want to be. What should you be looking at? And so we've given some discussion about engagement, the types of analysis that you might want to do, how to think about equity, how to get into some of the spatial analytics, how to think about neighborhood preservation, and then how to dig into your zoning code. And I will just editorialize here, from my personal experience, really understanding your zoning code and what you can build underneath it is the golden key to unlocking missing middle housing. Because in so many places across the Northeast, in the 70s and the 80s, we got this idea, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that big single-family homes were a good idea. And so there are a ton of ordinances out there where you can build massive single-family homes that are completely out of character with their surrounding context. And the communities where missing middle has really gotten a lot of traction has been in the places where they've seen that development and people are like, this does not fit within the character of my community, housing prices are going up, they're expensive. You kind of get the train of thought. And what you can do is go in and say, well, let's take that box that you've got and let's show what else we can fit inside of that. And let's show some different options. And let's talk about the architectural impacts or architectural elements that are impacting place character, right? So in a community that I've worked in, the first thing that we realized really early on was real porches make a difference, right? The community had porches. They had had a bunch of development that came in that put in those little faux porches where like it looks like a porch, but you couldn't put a chair in it. And they're like, that's not our community, right? That's not how we relate to our community. So it was much more important to get that piece right than it was to get the number of units on a site right. And we were able to sort of move through that process much easier once we figured that out. The other thing is we put in a lot of information about zoning options, some really great work that, for example, Morristown has done with their form-based code, where they've done things like variable lot standards. So one of the things in historic communities, especially in New Jersey, you have zones where you've got 100-foot wide lots and 50-foot wide lots and 20-foot wide lots, and it's like very difficult to come up with one single standard for all of those lots. And one of the things that we've learned is that if you come up with sort of these variable lot standards or dynamic lot standards, as Chris has used them, it allows you to set standards and have a lot fewer non-conforming lots within your development, which reduces costs, which supports production. And then a lot of special considerations for accessory dwelling units, which are their own sort of issue and something worth thinking about, but I think raise a whole lot of other questions for a lot of communities that are separate from some of the other gentle density conversations. And then finally, we've given you an implementation program, a scope. So if you are interested in doing this in your community, you can sort of start to take out this implementation program, redline it up, adjust it for your particular needs, but at least it's a starting point for the conversation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris Kazenza, project manager at LRK, multidisciplinary architecture and planning firm based out of Memphis, local office in Philly. I'm the municipal planner for Metuchen and Highland Park, and I briefly filled in as the planner for Princeton. So before I get into my discussion about sort of built examples of what Adam was talking about in terms of missing middle housing in Metuchen, I just want to talk about the underlying image. It's something that my colleagues and I use often. Sometimes we even forget that we use it. Simply put, if you're familiar with the viewpoint, it's just looking south in Princeton, the tree streets, Spruce at the bottom, Chestnut on the right, and Pine Street on the left. Just this unassuming image, perhaps. Most likely a bunch of detached single-family homes. But if you look further, what we especially like this image is that it actually embodies a lot of what we do in terms of professional practice, as well as to our topic of gentle density. Here, you see the variety of housing types, ranging from townhomes to taking a garage conversion. And I'm proud to say one of our colleagues lives in one of these missing middle housing. And I think what in terms of how we're looking at this, how does missing middle housing fit into established residential character? And I think you can see from this viewpoint that everything fits in harmoniously in a way. And there's a reason for that. One of the things that we often say in these types of presentations is that density does not have to look dense. But I will admit gentle density is a bit catchier. So let's go with that. So the part of that mindset as a planner is to really understand what the role of the building is within the context of the neighborhood. And the answer, of course, is, well, of course, we want to provide for housing diversity, which increases housing choice. But I think equally important is the urban design element of the building. That ranges from the building design to familiar pitched roofs, a porch as a gift to the street, and the location, the number, and the screening of parking areas, ideally not in the front yard. Ideally, the garage is pushed back. A lot of these homes don't even have garages. Or if they do have a garage, it's detached. Of course, with the current zoning, that's not allowed because of impervious coverage in most cases. The other urban design elements include simple things like street trees, yard trees, foundation plantings, and just general landscaping plays a critical role in allowing these housing types to, well, gently fit into the neighborhood. I think they play a critical role of really encouraging missing middle housing to fit into the neighborhood and really gain acceptance in the public realm. So I think this topic was talked about by Adam. You saw with the chart, all we've seen lately are large multifamily buildings or large McMansions. And Metuchen is not immune to that, but I did want to say that perhaps the large development does play a role. It is where it belongs. It's downtown core in an urban environment, pedestrian-friendly streetscapes. We took a 670 parking space development, and Woodmont came in, and they built with Nexus, and they built a 270-unit apartment complex, 700-space parking structure, and a town plaza about half acre. And it played a critical role in really jump-starting the renaissance of Metuchen for the past 10 years. And the other side of the spectrum is, of course, your McMansions. And Metuchen's try to do somewhat of a good job of making sure the porch is stepped back, the garage is stepped back, incentivizing porches so that way you can count the porch if it's at least 8 feet deep. That sort of responds to making a usable porch. But obviously, there's more work to be done. And we actually intend to address that in our master plan this year. But going back 30 years, the Renaissance really started really looking at infill of former, in this case, on the left side, Franklin Square, it's a former school site. The building was aging, and this was replaced with a planned unit residential development. Same thing on the right, Central Square, which took the place of a manufacturing facility. This was at the edge of a downtown. So perhaps instead of apartment buildings, dense apartment buildings everywhere, this is where you start to think about the gradation of the density and scale. And this was an opportunity to really introduce the PUD, residential development, by introducing a variety of housing types. Franklin Square had a range of up-down condominiums, and Central Square had a mixture of apartment buildings and rear-loaded townhomes. The rear-loaded townhomes is exciting because you almost can't do that anymore because a lot of the alleys in Metuchen were actually vacated to just give way to rear yard treatments because the alleys simply weren't used. In this case, we're actually reintroducing it back into the urban streetscape. What I like about Franklin Square, obviously, when you at the bottom left image, when you look at that sidewalk treatment, the double alley trees, lush landscaping, you got the porch element. It feels like it belongs. But when the project was first approved, people thought we were crazy, because on the right is State Highway Route 27. It's possible, and as you can tell, obviously the parking is away and hidden from view. On other types of infill developments, these were sort of larger lots, odd-shaped lots by rail lines, and or corner lots and blocks where you just couldn't figure out, like, should I just do 2 or 3 homes? In this case, we encourage them to think big, do a couple townhomes or duplexes. And when we do those types of treatments, we encourage them to emphasize the urban design element to make it fit into the neighborhood. Because, again, density does not have to look dense. So with the proper treatments of modest setbacks matching the single-family homes, with lush landscaping and tree plantings, and using where you have these odd spaces to create some gathering spaces, that creates a wonderful collective community for these types of developments. This was a interesting infill development. This what could have been just simply a single-family home. What we encourage the developers to do is to just have a simple driveway treatment, sidewalks, and have the townhouses. And here, in this case, you have 2 townhouse buildings, 3 units each, so 6 townhomes, parking obviously in the rear, and in the lower right, if you look back towards the background image, that's the train station, only 300 feet away. So there's opportunities to really rethink the zoning. Does a single-family work here? Or perhaps we should use gentle density to increase the density, because these residents obviously walk to the train station. Another example is a couple of duplexes we did recently. We did a design review. So the developers came in and was like, I need a use variance. What can I do here? And I encouraged them to look at the context of the neighborhood. And in the case on the right side, on Durham Avenue, actually behind Central Square. So there was a pattern of densification due to the development in the 90s. So there was an opportunity to perhaps a 2-family or more would be appropriate for this particular lot, despite it being a use variance. I worked with the developer here. It looks like they took that plan off the shelf with garages facing the street. So the driveway was like 40 feet of the line. So this is not going to fit in. You're going to get denied. So we use our architectural and urban design practice. If you can just make it fit in a little bit better, I think you have a shot. And using preservation of vegetation and narrowing the driveway, get the garage in the back, the application was approved with flying colors. And that was repeated in a few other cases, but in all cases, they were use variances. So our role as a planner was sort of like, yes, we put a zoning hat on and said, you can't do that. But put a planning hat on, they can encourage them and work with them and make certain improvements. And again, I think the front yard treatments and the streetscape design is critically important to gain support for these types of projects. Another infill project which we thought was interesting was, this is actually across the street from that 2-family. This is the 10-unit apartment building on the left side. And what we did was, again, put the parking in the back, hide it for view, and emphasize the landscaping. And despite the use variance for 10 units, where a single family was only allowed, it got support, no negative feedback, as long as it fit in and looked good. I think you can build public support for these types of housing. On the right side is the Nathan Robbins house, built in the 1800s. That's a stately home on Route 27. It was converted to a multifamily in the 1940s for veterans coming home from World War II. By that point in the 1950s, like many other communities, zoning was put in place that essentially took the cumulative zoning of just residential to only single-family residential is allowed. So that rendered the multifamily use as a non-conforming use. For decades, nothing could be done. If you even touch the building, you need a use variance, go away. But several years ago, a developer came in and said, I want to do a subdivision. I just want to build 2 houses on the through lot. There's another street on the back. And as you know, with the Raspberry case, if you subdivide a lot with a non-conforming use, it still need a use variance. So in this case, that sort of drove away the development. It's like, you know what, I'm just going to tear the house down and build 2 conforming houses. Okay, so I asked the question, like, well, would you be open to doing a redevelopment plan? And I asked the mayor and said, can we do that? Yeah, sure. We did area need rehab designation for the entire town, which is a useful tool, by the way. And we encouraged them to work together. It's like, I will make the the 5-family a conforming use. We'll do some modifications, get the driveway, the parking area pushed to the back, less than the front, and we'll allow for you to do 2 infill housing that would normally require variances for setbacks because of the size and shape of the lot was really odd. It kind of encroached into the side yards. So we adjusted it, custom fit the redevelopment plan to this specific situation. And with that, we were able to save the Nathan Robbins house, now been restored. And now we have 7 units, 5, I would say, naturally affordable housing units, as well as 2 single-family homes that went for $1 million, but that's besides the point. This was a oddball situation. Yes, the lower right image is intentional. There was a parking lot. This is directly across the street from Franklin Square. Parking area for this funeral home vehicles. They wanted to build an infill building on their own lot. And at first you go, really? Housing on a funeral home property? But we worked with the architect and said, just pay attention to what's across the street. You got typical 12-on-12 slope roofs on Franklin Square. You got a nice little stoop. If you need your parking, just park it underground, sort of like a podium structure, and just build 3 or 4 or 5, I don't care how many, apartments above it. And it fit in beautifully to the neighborhood. It preserved the street trees. It sort of reconnects that streetscape, because right now this is just a parking lot exposed to view. So actually was a benefit to allowing for the infill on a funeral home lot. Another example of sort of infill on a small lot. So this was actually similar to an image that Adam had presented in Metuchen. This was after the Franklin Square development was developed, there was a sort of leftover out parcel. It's like, well, what can we do here? We kind of like what's happening there. So we worked with not me, this is before my time. We worked with the developer. I think it's fine to do 2-family because it's representative of the type of development that occurs elsewhere on the street. Because as you recall, Franklin Square has a series of up-down condominiums. So in this case, we did a side-by-side duplex. But the lot was large enough where it's almost like a flag lot. Like, let's get that driveway down the back and have another house back there. Who cares? You can't even see it from the street. And it fits in well because it's got the same type of setback, the lush landscaping, the street plantings, no issues. Just fits in. It feels like it fits in, even though the underlying zoning wouldn't permit it. This is my last slide. So this was a single-family home. I remember in 2012, I was a zoning official in Metuchen at the time. Homeowners came in to see me and say, hey, I got my parents, they're not doing well. I would like to take care of them. I kind of don't want to ruin my backyard. I do have a garage in the back. Can I just do an apartment back there? Like, zoning hat said, no, you can't. But let me put my planning hat on and say, I think you should try to pursue it. And let me give you some guidance as to reasons why. One, the development is behind the lot. It doesn't affect the streetscape. And they went to the board, fingers crossed, and they even offered, I will de-restrict it so that it's only for my family, and I will remove the shower and the extra entrance as used as office space upon the passing of my parents, because they were not doing that well. Surprisingly, the zoning board said, I don't think you need to do that. We'd be fine if you rented it out. The reason was because just to the right is a strip center facing Amboy Avenue, and behind the property is a pre-war garden apartment complex. So we felt like this was an appropriate place to put density, despite the fact that it was actually on the edge of town, not quite in a transit center. But I spoke to the new homeowners just a few weeks ago when I took these pictures, and I said, wow, this is great, but the only issue was when we bought the property, it was difficult to get an appraisal because there's nothing like this in town. So we got screwed, they say, during the trying to apply for a mortgage. But after speaking with them, they're kind of unassuming. And then when I started talking of who I am, like, oh, I love all this stuff. I want to be involved. Like, you should join the master plans. So I made a friend, and they are in the process of trying to find a tenant, and that's going to help them pay down the mortgage. So these are like sort of great stories. And I think what the takeaway I'm trying to get at is, yes, we can fill in the missing middle by promoting housing, increasing the opportunity for housing choice. But to get to that point, I think the urban design element is critically important to make it fit into the neighborhood, because people do come out against these large multifamily and townhouse projects with just garages in front. Ugh, they're ugly. But if you make it look good and they fit in, no one complains and it fits in. So I think the next step would be to really look at the master plan, which we're doing an update this year and next year, and see if we can sort of, encourage to be allowed in more places. And just because you make the changes to zoning doesn't mean it's going to change overnight. It's incremental, and I think that's an approach that we should really advocate for.
Well, good morning. How's everyone doing today? Glad you're in Newark? Yes. See, there's a few people glad we were in Newark. I'm thrilled you're here. See, yeah, that's even better. We get claps. All right. So again, welcome. Welcome to Newark. I hope you took transit or walked or found a way to get here without your car, which I know is difficult because we are here in New Jersey. So, but hope you tried. I know I try myself. So, I'm Allison Ladd. I serve as Mayor Raj J. Baraka's Deputy Mayor for Economic and Housing Development. And I've been here now in the city for about 6 years. And it's been a real exciting time, I think, for the city. But at the same time, I think that we're learning a lot from other communities, and I'm really glad to be part of this panel today. So I did want to say thank you to the organizers for including the City of Newark and asking me to be here today. I also thought before I get started, I'm going to tell you some stories, but I have no pictures, I'm sorry. But I will tell you some stories, and I'll tell you about how some actions are creating gentle density here in Newark. Let's just start by saying a couple things. I notice I have a few people in the audience, which always calms me down. So I saw George Santos here. He's at Newark Alliance. He has previously been at New Jersey EDA and has done a lot throughout the city of Newark, but also throughout the state. Also see a good friend who I've known since grad school, Kristen Mitchell. She and I started grad school at University of Maryland together, and I think she graduated before me. But anyways, it's great to see her in New Jersey now. We did a lot of work in, she did a lot of work in Baltimore and also in Maryland. And then at that time I was in DC. So it's always good to see when you kind of come back home, you get to see old faces, so to speak. Not that you're old, but it's great to see you here and everyone else. So, but when I think about this topic, and I think about Mayor Baraka, and I think about working here, one thing that I think that makes it possible to even have missing middle housing or gentle density policies is having a bold leader. You need to have someone who's willing to take the risk for a whole lot of people to be mad at you. Because what we're talking about is not easy. It's not easy to find a way to change a zoning ordinance. It's not easy to find a way to get developers, whether they're for-profit, nonprofit, local Newark-based, or from another part of the country, to want to do affordable housing. And it's not easy to change laws that sometimes can reduce somebody's perceived business plan. But when you have bold leadership, whether it's in a mayor or it's in a municipal council, you have the ability to make systematic changes that hopefully will give all of you a chance to come to Newark and do this type of housing here, because we do see it often, and we do need more. Because here, as you know, in Newark and other places, there is a housing crisis. We know that Rutgers a couple years ago did a study and said we needed more than 16,000 units. We also know that's really hard to build out of that problem, but we sure are trying. So you probably want to know, how are we doing that? Well, I'll tell you a few things. First, our mayor created goals. So in 2020, we created some goals, and one of them was production goal. And we wanted to have a production goal to actually also include affordable housing. And with that, what I will tell you is that as of today, we have 6,407 units that have been either opened or are under construction today. With that, 1,576 units are affordable. That is 24% of our units are affordable. That is more than our inclusionary zoning ordinance that only requires 20%. So the fact that the city has taken on the need to create housing that's affordable for everyone who wants to live here is really starting to show when you look at the data. Because you need data, because again, a lot of people might say no. But in order for you to start changing people's minds, some of the data, also pictures, so I would like to get some pictures, but the data and the pictures help really convince people that what we're talking about, density, gentle density, multiple units, is just what communities need. It's just what's called for. It's what we should be doing because we want to embrace people to have choice. And I think that's pretty exciting that we start off with some goals. The next thing is that, as we heard already, master plans have to occur in the state every 10 years. In Newark, we just went through our master planning process about 3.5 years ago. So with master plans, you need engagement. So we had a name of our master plan was Newark 360. So you want to know what the planner at the time told me what Newark 360 meant? He told me that it meant we had to have 360 meetings. Thank you. I'm glad everybody laughed because I was like, oh my God. And I don't mind, who needs nights and weekends? But, but I was like, okay, so, but then what happened is COVID hit. So what we did is we actually did it virtually. And then as COVID kind of slowed, we were able to do more meetings in person. And I think that we did not have 365 meetings, felt like it, but we did actually have about 10,000 touch points. And I think that was also an important factor because we were at a different time. Who knew what to do during COVID? Who knew about Zoom? Of course, now I think everyone's trying to take Zoom away. Sorry, Zoom. But really all that to tell you, I think that the community engagement process was important because what that master plan did was say, we want to create smaller neighborhoods, smaller communities, walkable communities. We want to create places that are affordable. We don't necessarily mind density, but it does matter what it looks like. And so how do we do that? And so, so we submitted the plan. We did all these touch points. It was great. We were happy. Good news. We actually met the statutory requirement. Well, then a plan is great. But how do you implement it? Through a zoning ordinance, which requires a lot of additional work. But we have a great team, and the team was able to then spend another 1.5 years working on a zoning ordinance that would reflect on the goals that were set in the master plan. If that, we actually had to have, which is appropriate, more community meetings. So we might have, by the time we did the master plan and the zoning ordinance, we might have got to 365, but nonetheless. So what's a big deal about a zoning ordinance or the master plan as it relates to this topic? I'll tell you a couple things. One was accessory dwelling units. It wasn't allowed here either. And we didn't have as flexible conversations about it in our office. So basically, accessory dwelling units were denied. So we agreed, our mayor agreed, that we would try to put accessory dwelling units in all 6 of our residential zones. We got tremendous pushback. We got pushback from the state levels, from local levels, from everybody. And I think it was more out of fear than it was out of understanding. And probably if we had more meetings, but if we had more meetings, we probably could have shown more ideas like even what Metuchen is doing that helps people feel more comfortable about what an ADU is. And plus in Newark, some people already did them. They weren't supposed to, but they've already done it. So, but ultimately, what did it equal? We ended up with ADUs only in the R1 zone. So we didn't get all 6, but we got R1. It's a start. And we got to start somewhere. The second thing is that in Newark, we have a lot of multi-unit but single-family developments. So we have a lot of 2s, 3s, and 4-unit developments here. Now, if you're going to do a 2-family, no problem. You don't need a variance. If you were going to do a 3-family, you needed a variance. You had to go to the zoning board, you had to pay more money, you had to hire an attorney, maybe, and then you had to go to the zoning board and wait possibly 6 months to build a 3-family unit. That, many of you may know this, was almost the exact same height, width, setback as a 2-family. So what we were doing is saying that if you want to build a 3-family, you have to wait 6 months, you have to expend more money, and you aren't able to do it quickly. But now with the zoning ordinance, we actually changed it. So now you can do a 2-family and a 3-family in the same zone. So we're able to do more development in our sites. So why is it important? Because we had a lot of land. I don't know if anybody knew that, but the city of Newark owned a lot of land. It wasn't land that you really might want to buy, but it was land that was available. And so why do I say that? Is because much of the land was infill lots on a neighborhood street or someplace that we sadly had to foreclose on a piece of land. So it wasn't as attractive to the larger developers because they weren't contiguous sites. But we had 1,000+ pieces of land. So we were seeing a lot of developers who wanted to buy property, but also wanted to do a business plan and make a profit. And they wanted to do not just a 2-family, but they wanted to do a 3-family. But as soon as you have to go through a zoning ordinance process, it actually changes the math. So it also makes it unaffordable. So by making that change, it also helped us do the second thing, which was our land sales. And it helped us move our land sales process faster because once you sell it, you get some money for the land sale, but you really want the taxes. You want the project to actually generate some revenue and have some tax base so that we have a city that has revenue to provide the services. So it was really helpful to us to have this change in the zoning ordinance also impact our land sales. Last 2 parts about this were just to say that we also have a land bank here in the city of Newark, and that's been a big part of what we're trying to do is just sell land faster, more efficiently, and also create home ownership opportunities through land sales, and oftentimes they are 2-family and 3-family units. And then the final part on this is just to talk about equitable investments, which is a community development idea that the mayor came up with a couple years ago. And this was to really focus on local developers who wanted to participate in neighborhood revitalization, not just buy a piece of land, flip it, or just buy a piece of land, own it, and then have rents be astronomical. They were really interested in providing affordable housing. So we created this effort that hyper-focused on community Newark-based organizations, local Newark-based developers, as well as minority developers and women-led developers. Today, I'm happy to tell you we have 16 groups out of 93 who applied that are going through the development process, and every single project is going to be affordable housing. And it's exciting to see how you can take some tactics and techniques and actually create affordable housing options, as well as do infill development, as well as do some gentle density approaches. So my last part I'll talk to you about, and then I'll sit down and let you hear from somebody else, is so everything that I'm talking about is important naturally, but one thing that really changed, I think, some of our trajectory here and relates to the topic is rent control. So how many of you know we changed our rent control ordinance like 2 years ago? Anybody? Okay. So for the long time, our rent control ordinance was for public housing, was for very specific affordable housing developments, exempted all of new construction, doesn't matter whether you're a small building or a big building, and really exempted 1 to 4 unit buildings. Anyone driven around Newark neighborhoods? Newark neighborhoods are predominantly, if you go to the south, the west, sometimes the east too, 1 to 4 unit buildings. Those 1 to 4 unit buildings were not under rent control. And so our mayor, what I will tell you, because it was all publicly done, so I'll tell you, what he really wanted to do is he wanted to cap rental increases on all properties in the city. That's what he really wanted to do. Because he was worried about the housing crisis, he was worried about the rents going skyrocketing, he was worried about displacement of Newark residents, he was worried about all of that. So what he really wanted us to do, and which we did do, we introduced legislation to cap rent increases for all properties at 5%. Now, how many people think that worked? Nope. Did not work. We had a lot of people come to our city council, a lot of lawyers came, and they're lovely, but they definitely said no, because some cases they were, I think, making it akin to like a taking, like we were limiting their ability to make a profit, which, you know, depending upon where you sit, you might be able to see that from a perspective, but we didn't. So what we did, though, is that we came to a different agreement. We said, okay, well, we'll take the, you know, increase to 5% off the table, but what we are going to do is every building that's 1 to 4 units is now under rent control. They now have to register. They now have to have inspections. They now can only increase their rent by 4% maximum a year. And they have to follow all of the rules of rent control here in the city. Now, not everybody is thrilled about it, but I do think it's the right thing because many of our Newark residents live in these units. And when you have a lot of, last part I'll say, and then I will sit, is to say that, you know, if you read any of the other reports by Rutgers, like a lot of investors are coming here. And they're the same LLC companies. They're buying property for cash. And they're removing Newark residents from our neighborhoods. And then when they buy them and they put these rental units there, they're having them at rental prices that you can't afford. And our residents can't afford because they only make like $36,000, $37,000 a year. And they have a family. So being able to come up with different solutions, whether it's setting goals to make sure you do production, or whether it's changing land use and zoning so you actually have the ability to work with development community who wants to build in your city, or if you're finding ways to get land to be more affordable and also create affordable housing opportunities, and even capping some rents and adding 1 to 4 unit buildings and into rent control. It's something we're proud of because we think it creates a more equitable place for our residents to live. But I will also tell you, come do business here. We're open, we want to do this, and we've created some mechanisms that hopefully will help you. So thanks for the time. Sorry, I forgot my last duty. Chris Strom is coming from New Jersey Future.
Okay, thanks, Allison. I just have a question about who's in the audience. I don't know all of you. How many folks here are developers or in the development business? Yeah, raise your hands so we can see them. Okay, how many folks are working in local government or county government? Got a few people, maybe, okay. How many people here are advocates or work for nonprofit organizations? Okay, we've got a bunch of that. How many folks working at state level? Or federal? Okay, a lot of state government folks. And what kinds of people did I miss? Private equity. Private equity, money. Oh, consultants, the consulting sector. Okay. Transit, thank you. All right, excellent. So I am Chris Sturm. I work at New Jersey Future. We are a nonprofit organization that's been around for 40 years promoting smart growth. We want everyone in New Jersey to be able to live in a community that's healthy, where they have access to opportunity, that's resilient and safe. And we do this through state policy. And so my remarks are going to focus on how we take what the previous speakers have talked about at scale statewide. But we also provide technical assistance to local governments. We build a lot of collaborations, and we work with directly impacted folks to make sure that their voices are part of the conversation. I'm going to introduce my colleague, Valerie Merritt, who is our communications and media manager and used to work at NJTOD. So if you don't know Val, you should meet her. And we've got some stuff up on the front. A little thing on New Jersey Future and a blurb on this project that I'm going to talk to you about. And it's our approach at trying to make sure that how we address New Jersey as a state and each of its communities is addressing our housing shortfall. So in 2023, we got together with a bunch of folks, developers, academics, advocates, local officials, planners, to say, how are we going to take advantage of the Mount Laurel fourth round, which then was coming up, we're now in the middle of it, where communities, over 300 communities across the state, have to plan for allowing construction of hundreds of units. And how can we make sure that those homes are actually great places to live, in addition to being affordable? And what the group came up with was a vision that we want to have compact, walkable locations where we have access to opportunity, places that are healthy and green, places that are stable, so we're not having displacement, stable from rising rents, stable from displacement due to flooding, and where schools and activities are quality and inclusive and safe. And this came up, this vision came from talking with lots of people, including people in Newark on the front lines of dealing with folks who were, potentially going to become homeless. Next slide, or can I do this? How do I do that? I should be able to figure this out. Okay. This one? Oh, there we go. Okay. So, all right. So we're here talking about missing middle housing through gentle density. And I just want to share a little bit of history. So now I'm going to talk about the problem. So that was the vision problem, and then in a little bit I'll talk about some solutions. So you can see here that since 1950, over 70 years worth of data, single-family homes have remained pretty constant at about just over half of New Jersey's housing stock. We're seeing an increase in the share in those larger buildings, more recently especially thanks to Mount Laurel requirements, but we've seen a big decline in the number of 2 to 4 unit dwellings from about 30% to down to 15%. So we're here for a reason today. And as Adam also showed, there's definitely been a big drop-off in the production of housing in New Jersey. And I'm sure there's many causes, but this is part of what is causing the housing shortage. And this underscores why we need to increase our housing supply. I don't think we can argue about that. Just a few symptoms. I don't know if you know this, that how many people in the room are between 18 and 34? All right, a lot. Okay, well, New Jersey has more people of your age group living with their parents than any other state, at about 43%. A lot of people have trouble affording their own place, and then when they're young, when they're old, they can't find a place to downsize into, and everything in between. And so one of the solutions is leaving the state. So we're the fourth largest net out migration in the country after much larger states, New York, California, Illinois. And finally, we have high rents, and Adam's slide is much better than this little statistic. So what can we do about this? So the folks that came together to form Great Homes and Neighborhoods for All, which is now a larger and growing collaborative, and I encourage all of you to come up, grab a flyer and sign up to get updates and potentially to endorse the principles that we have. And I'll tell you about those in a minute. But the idea is that if we are really going to change how we produce housing in New Jersey, we need to build a movement. There are so many powerful interests that want to stay with our status quo. We need better state policies. We need to change systems that govern land use decision-making and investment. We're talking about property tax systems, home rule, et cetera. And in order to accomplish this, we need not only state-level advocates, but a network of local campaigns and people who are working with local officials. So what does this effort focus on? Like, what is the substance of the effort? And the group adopted 6 principles. One is that we need to produce more housing in addition to the Mount Laurel requirements. And this gets to things like Allison was talking about, more missing middle housing, preservation of existing housing, upgrading it, et cetera, inclusionary zoning ordinances, maybe a statewide requirement. We need to protect tenants who are at risk of being displaced, and they deserve a right to counsel, et cetera. We need zoning reform. I'm going to talk a lot more about that. Our government needs to be more efficient. I don't know if any of you have seen the book Abundance, which is on the New York Times bestselling list. There's a lot that stands in the way of getting things done and building things in New Jersey and in the country. Local planning is underproduced. I mean, it's great to see when towns have planners like Chris and can do such creative work, but that's not always the case. And then again, we need those local campaigns. So this is what Great Homes and Neighborhoods for All wants to achieve. We have an action agenda for 2025, and 2 areas I want to focus on. With zoning reforms, we have launched a zoning campaign. We're a 501c3, but we are able to do advocacy and education work within that. So our priorities for this year are to permit ADUs statewide. Many other states have done this. It's controversial, as Allison knows, but I live in Princeton where they have them, and it's not a big deal, so we should be able to get there. To permit the conversion of stranded assets, which is basically underperforming office and retail spaces, into mixed-use housing at some basic densities. This could really be a significant dent in our housing stock in the short term. We need to reduce parking requirements. You know, there's legislation that we're supporting that would reduce it near transit, but it really should be statewide because developers can always build parking if they're, make their project more valuable. But when it's not needed, it is a huge dollar suck that takes away money from building housing, eats up land. We see empty parking spaces, et cetera. So that's a game changer, kind of like a low-profile game changer. And then we need to achieve compact transit-oriented development. New Jersey Transit needs riders. We have too many stations with, parking lots or single-family homes or underutilized buildings around them. Our train stations are a state resource, and they need to be, the areas around them cannot be fettered by local control. So we don't have missing middle housing authorization on this list. I don't think it's politically feasible this year. I don't think most of this will happen this year, maybe next year. We'll see who our next governor is. But we need to catch up to other states. So that's the zoning reform list. On government efficiency, what we're focusing on right now is fairly narrow. It's how can the local development review process be streamlined? When projects take too long, they cost more, they don't always happen, and less housing gets built. And so we're working with a very small group of local business administrators, real estate attorneys, planners, developers, builder association, to get together and just say, what are the common sense things we all agree on? And there are a bunch, like can we have time frames for the various phases of development review? If your application is not found complete and you resubmit, the town now has no deadline for getting back to you. And even the business administrators say, you know what, we should have a deadline. We do what we're required to do. And then another approach to this is changing zoning so it really reflects what you want, and then making it easy for folks to produce the kind of housing you want, providing very specific pattern books, and Adam showed some of those drawings, and then offering more administrative reviews where you don't have to go to a board if you're conforming. So these are, just starting on this. Other states are doing much more, but that's what we're focused on. We're grateful to be part of a national network called the Welcoming Neighbors Network, which has grown up in the last few years in response to the national housing shortage. And they provide us with best practices, with resources, with an advisor every other week, with some funding. We'll be doing polling this summer. And so that gives us hope that we can, in New Jersey, that this effort can be successful. And so, I'm really looking forward to the discussion because there's all kinds of rubs to accomplishing all of this, especially in a state with 564 municipalities, 65. But, maybe things are getting so bad that we can get something done. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to kick it off, I think, because what kept resonating with me, both from Allison talking about the pushback she was getting, but then the examples we were seeing in Metuchen and how we're just doing variances and doing it, and whether you're getting pushback. Can we just have a little conversation about gaining community buy-in and to make this happen? How are you getting the things that you have gotten through, and how are you getting all that done in Metuchen? So I don't know, maybe one of you two could start and
Sure.
bounce off of each other.
I guess I'm lucky enough to have boards that trust me. And our firm, Jim Constantine, we've been legacy planners for almost 30 plus years. So there's a lot of trust into that, the practice of planning. And we try to be practical. We've been always saying, and the boards understand it, that density doesn't have to look dense. So as long as it looks good, you can do it. And then I think developers have really caught on, and so they will call me on my cell phone at night and say, hey, what do you think of this? Like, well, if you do this, and let's get on a call, let's talk about design, and then we'll raise up the flagpole. So there's a lot of collaboration, and then where it involves multiple dwellings, we try to engage the neighbors and say, what do you think? So we try to be collaborative and really be transparent with the process. We also don't try to lead developers along on a project that's just going to crash and burn. So it's a lot about collaboration and being practical with our solutions. And we also emphasize, like, listen, we don't mind there's 2 or 3 units, but it's got to look good. So I think Metuchen has a pretty strong sense of design standards. They can certainly be improved for the 3 and 4 family. And because if you look at the standard, they probably mostly apply to garden apartments and townhouse structures. But there's opportunity, and I think there's acceptance to control and design, and developers understand it. So they come in knowing that we were passionate about how it fits in, and even in landscaping. So it's a lot about collaboration, having strong convictions of the design of the buildings.
What about the neighbors? Who are they?
So the neighbors, from my experience, obviously they react negatively to large multifamily projects, and understandably so. But as I show with the various examples, as long as it's designed in a way that fits into the character of the neighborhood, a lot of people are accepting of it. So we found that, again, the design of the building at modest density, modest scales, and really educating the public and the developer about the process and what the wants and needs, notwithstanding in situations where there are use variances. We found the neighbors to be accepting of the smaller scale mixed middle housing because they react negatively when it's McMansion. Oh, they tore down all those trees. I don't care about the $50,000 payment. It's going to take forever for that new tree to grow in. And 200 apartments, this town's turning into Hoboken. Nothing wrong with Hoboken. But what we found is the missing middle being built, there's support for it. And I suspect that we'll find that in more places around the state. I don't think Metuchen is unique to that.
So I would say in Newark, I think our challenges are probably similar to other places, but part of it is that people don't trust us. I mean, that's the easiest thing to say is that people don't trust us. And I think that even when you have someone who is, I think, well-liked, whether it's the mayor or other people who are in the city, it's you still have to have that trust, and we have to really get out of our academic, intellectual heads and have a conversation about why people are uncomfortable with density. And I will say that it's easy for me to even say that up here because I will say I don't think we did it well when we had all of our meetings. We had a lot of meetings, but as you heard, but I don't think we did it well because it was less of a dialogue and more of a presentation. And I think in order for us to be able to get past a presentation, we have to have the ongoing dialogue. So I'll say that because then will just say one other piece, which is that, so I said I got here about 6 years ago. When I arrived, the now Congresswoman, but former Council President, LaMonica McIver, she was one of the first council members who required community meetings for development projects. I got here and I was surprised that developers did not have to have community meetings. I was like, we don't have to have community meetings? They're like, no, they just go through the, public process. They go to the board. The public who's 200 feet gets noticed. They can come and object and they want to or ask questions and, projects advance. Well, the longer I'm here, the more I go back to the community just didn't trust us because they didn't know. They didn't know enough about what was happening in the city. They felt like it was a lot of behind closed doors conversations. And so I think over the years, we've just been trying to be more transparent. And transparent is easy to say and hard to do. And I think for us, we're just trying to be more honest, more consistent, more practical about what we want to do in the city. And so that's what's been, I think, better. Now, it didn't garner us a lot of support when we tried to do ADUs. I mean, really, like I did not know it was going to, I mean, I guess we did. I will say that at least we didn't do parking, so I'll stop after that. We were going to say no parking requirements. That was in one of our very original drafts. And we even had our mayor on board. We were going to have no parking requirements, and we were going to do ADUs in all residential zones. But it just didn't go well and sit well because, again, it's New Jersey, even Newark. I mean, people like cars, people worry about traffic, and I know that has nothing really probably to do with middle housing, but all that to say, I think that the answer is just that we had to continue to build trust, and so hopefully we'll just continue to do that.
Can I add something to that? Because I think I can sort of sit in between this, like, you have a lot of trust with your community. You are building trust with your community. And like a lot of the work that we do around this is building that trust process. And I've started to try to hit home this message, especially to myself, which is to remind myself that, especially when you have a lot of like owner-occupied housing, but even if you have a lot of investment housing, but it's investment housing that's historic. It's not people coming in, last month and buying, but these are people who've owned their places for, 50 years and rented it. This is their security blanket, right? This is their investment. This is their retirement. This is everything that they've got, saved up is in this thing. And you're talking about changing the context around that. And I think it'd be really crazy to think that people shouldn't be scared in that environment. And I think one of the things that we can do as a profession is really start to shift our ideas around like NIMBYism is bad and understanding the core emotions behind NIMBYism, and then talking to them about the real trade-offs that are there. And I think one of the things that missing middle housing conversations bring up is there are essentially three things that people want. They want affordable housing. They want their neighborhoods to be able to remain how they are. They want character preservation, and they want more housing choices. And it's some three, you're somewhere on that three-legged stool, and it's the old pick two. You can't have all three, right? You can have character preservation and, character preservation and more housing choice, but your affordabilities are going to go really high up. Land values are going to go up because you're creating value through zoning. And engaging people in that conversation and trying to figure out where the community lies around those three things, I think changes the dynamic from like, we have the answers as consultants and professionals, and more to like, these are value choices. Where do you want to land as a community? What's important to you? And then we'll shape the recommendations around that. And at least in my experience, more and more people land on I'll accept a lot more, as long as it's designed well, I'll accept a lot more density in exchange for housing affordability and housing choice. That's where I think most people's values end up lying.
Nationally, messages that have been shown to work are to talk about, we have a shortage of housing, and we want, in communities, we want to be able to, for our local workers to be able to live near their jobs and to start to put, descriptions of the school secretary or the nurse or whatever, so people can start to understand that, because people do understand the need for affordable housing, but you've got to personalize it for them. And like you said, Adam, I like that. It's sort of like, do you want broccoli, carrots, or Brussels sprouts? You can have two. They're not even negative, but
it's just that there's a trade-off there that as like, professionals, we can present people with those trade-offs, but we do have to give them some agency to understand those issues and make those trade-offs for themselves, right? And decide where they sit on it. And I think the nice thing about that sort of pick two option is it separates this idea that there's a right answer and a wrong answer to the conversation. It's what's your answer as a community. And I really agree with Chris on the messaging. Like, we like to pick up on narratives in communities. So a community we've worked with, everybody thinks of them as a multi-generational community. That's how they imagine themselves. That's how they see themselves. They're not a multi-generational community anymore because nobody can afford to buy into their community. Another community we worked with, their slogan is literally everybody's hometown. It's like, great idea. Can't be everybody's hometown if only people who can afford $1 million home are moving in and buying it. So like tying it to those larger narratives, to Chris's point, I think are really, really critical.
I think the point that you made about our percent of post-grads living at home too could also be, invite all those parents out to the meeting when you're talking about building more housing. I did just want to follow up on, I understand people not wanting ADUs. Like Princeton and Metuchen got ADUs, and I could actually see the NIMBYism and the pushback being more there versus a Newark where there are so many ADUs anyway that happened illegally or however, and there is density. What was the pushback here on them?
I sensed that it was traffic. So anyone who, like me, learned triple parking, I mean, I know double parking, but triple parking, I mean, we're pretty good at it in Newark. I think traffic was a big piece of it. I think second, it was change. I think someone else said that. So change. So even when we showed the neighbors that they had houses within their community, because our planner went out and took pictures before the meeting to say this is an ADU in your neighborhood. It was disbelief. And so I think that they were not interested in the change part. And I think the last part is it was, well, why are you doing it? And I think we knew that the intention was more around housing affordability and helping, seniors or parents provide housing for their children or provide housing for themselves and have caregivers close. But I don't know if everyone thought that. I think some thought, well, maybe it's a development ploy and you're just trying to help developers do more business in our city. And can't you see already nicely that they're already doing a lot here and they're not allowing the residents to stay? And and what I'm telling you is not because somebody wrote it into us and gave us a comment card. It's just from being here now for a few years and listening to people talk about it, is that I think they felt like, again, back to the trust, they just didn't trust that something we were doing would be good for them and good for their home and their neighborhood. So our ones. So we'll keep trying.
Can I jump in on the ADU conversation? Because this is something I'm becoming a little bit of the wet blanket on ADUs out there, in part because of sort of your experience. I would just suggest that if you're thinking about ADUs as an option, really pay attention to whether or not you have the capacity for them to be readily incorporated within your community. So Newark does have that capacity. There is the infrastructure and it's there. Some of the more towns with carriage houses that are readily convertible. If you are a 1950s, 1960s suburban community with, maybe a one-story integrated garage, the cost of an ADU is incredibly expensive. And the political capital that you have to invest into the ordinance changes, I think, is a lot. And I think you could get more out of looking at duplexes, which have more site controls around them. It's a little bit easier, I think, politically to sort of work through that than thinking about this idea that somebody, and the way that I put it is, an ADU, like freestanding, can cost you $150,000 to $200,000 to build. You got to finance that. If you put into your ordinance that it has to be occupied by somebody who's related to the person in the home, no bank is going to give somebody a $150,000 loan for a structure that if they sell that building, there's no guarantee that somebody's going to be able to occupy that structure. So now you basically created a situation where you're asking somebody to have $150,000 to solve an affordable housing crisis. It's like wacky. Where I have seen it work a lot more, and I think where people need to start adjusting it, is integrated as part of new development. I didn't bring a slide here, but what I've seen a lot of, and an example in a Pennsylvania community, where it would have been 3 units on about a 120-foot site. So a duplex and then a standalone single family. And what it ended up being is 6 units with the ADUs integrated in the back. And what the developer could do is roll the development costs into, or the construction costs into the overall development, right? It's not a big lift to add an extra unit on top of it. And that way, all of a sudden you're going from 3 units to 6 units. We'll see what it looks like when it goes out to rent. I will say this, they're selling at $1.2 million for those buildings, in part, and I think somebody mentioned this before, because you've got a rental unit that's now generating income. That's value there. So we're going to see, I think, when these actually get built, what do they rent at? And that's going to be the big question, I think, on the affordability. Again, you can't have your cake and eat it too. What it does potentially create situations of is like an owner class and a renter class, where it's like, hey, I can afford to buy essentially a 2 or 3 unit building, rent out the other ones, and now you've got a very select few people who are doing that. But that's a whole nother conversation, and you've got,
Okay.
yeah.
So I want to challenge that a little. Let's spice it up. No. So I've had 3 experiences with ADUs. First, I moved into my single-family home on a half-acre lot, and 25 years ago, and there were illegal ADUs across the street in 2 of my neighbors' homes. I had no idea. One was a granny flat. Granny died, and my neighbors were retiring, so they ended up splitting that into 2 in-house apartments to give them the income they needed to pay their property taxes. On the other side was Rita. She had 6 kids who had moved out, was living in this big empty house by herself as a widow. And she then had an ADU where a newly separated divorced parent moved in with her 8-year-old daughter who could still walk to school. Then they left, and then an older guy came in, and he shoveled her driveway. I mean, it just seemed really great. And we had plenty of room for parking because of these half-acre lots. So now they're legal in Princeton. Some are separate, some are inside. It's okay. They're not affordable, but they provide housing choice. So just yeah.
100%. And I would go to what you're saying is like in unit and like breaking up single family homes, I think is something to really think about. And that's a tradition that's been long in the making.
Yeah.
And we don't have to necessarily call it accessory dwelling unit, right? Like
Yeah,
you can
sure. Yeah.
You can play with that a little bit. That makes it, I think, a little bit more palatable and accessible from like an implementation standpoint. But I
Yeah.
hear what you're saying. Housing choice is really
Yeah,
important.
and then my last example is my son lives in Seattle, in like a neighborhood that used to have a bunch of bungalows, and it's a nice neighborhood. Now they allow duplexes, triplexes, and quads on those lots, and they are ugly. They are like out to the lot line practically, big boxes, but they're housing. You can buy a home, and so I've stayed in an ADU in the basement of, not the basement, the lower level of one of those that was built that way.
We call them garden level.
Garden level, excuse me. That's right, the garden level. And then I've stayed in ADUs where there's like an older home with 3 ADUs. I've stayed in ADUs in a garage, former garage, where my husband and I were taking a shower like this. But they're great as a consumer. And anyway, this neighborhood still has the charming bungalows, but And Seattle's obviously way out in front in allowing this stuff. And so I'm just really interested in this notion that duplexes might be, and so it gets to design, but that duplexes might be more supported than ADUs.
Yeah, I mean, I think what people fear about the ADU, at least in my like conversations with them, is that they're going to come in and like change the neighborhood, right? People are going to be plopping them in their backyards, and that there's going to be sort of no control over them. And I think the idea of like duplexes or triplexes, one, like gets at the bigger issues, and you can sort of sneak in ADUs in the back of it. But I think it also gives people a sense of like, oh, this is going to go through a development process, rather than my random neighbor who's going to wake up one day and be like, I'm going to start doing an Airbnb. And that's like the big one that we get the pushback on, is like, aren't these all going to turn into short-term rentals? What controls are going to be there? And it opens up all these conversations that feel like you've got to then talk about, well, first we need a short-term rental ordinance. Then we've got to deal with this question of like utilities and how are they Princeton, how are we going to subdivide them? And it just like opens up question after question after question, when it's like, well, what about 2 units? You know, what about duplexes? What about stacked townhomes? What about, 3 units? There's a lot of other options out there. And it almost feels like what feels like the easy answer ends up being a little bit of like the morass that you get stuck into. And it's like, well, we could talk about other stuff too.
So let's shift a little bit to the affordability question and how, so they might start with the intention of being affordable, and they might even start as affordable, but then as the community comes along, they start to be just as expensive as anything else. I do want to make one comment on this. So in my own, we have a 4th floor row house. And so the first floor is the garden level apartment. And I think for us, because we live there and we have a good tenant, it stays affordable because I don't want to raise her rent because I don't want her to leave because she doesn't complain. She keeps the place clean. She pays her rent on time every month. So I think those type of, I don't know, it's not an ADU, it's a 2-family. I don't know what the heck you call it when it's that, but I think it is naturally affordable because, we're there. If we didn't live there, we might not care. We'd be like, let's get as much money out of it as we can. So I think that is one thing, when you have it as an owner occupied, helps with that. But any other thoughts about how we keep these things affordable? ADUs, you can't deed restrict. I guess you could deed restrict, but who's going to build it if it's deed restricted? Right. Any thoughts, concepts on I think the rent control obviously is one.
Sure. So I'll say in Newark, we were, so our ADU, or the ADU part of the ordinance does not require affordability. But I will say, though, that we were fortunate to receive $4 million through the Pro Housing grant process through HUD. And so far, it's still coming. So what we did, though, is we were proposing that we would fund the creation of ADUs for affordable purposes. And so that was our approach, is use it financing to create the affordability, to your point about cost, and needing some type of way to absorb some of the cost. I think that was our approach, was to say that you could build an ADU or create an ADU just in any kind of market rate. But at the same time, if you wanted to access resources, then we would have you have a affordability restriction on it. So that was our approach.
I mean, I will say we're going to be stuck in this for a while. And the problem that we've got is I think we all know we've got to create more supply, right, in order to address the affordability issue. And the problem that at least I've run into, and I'm sure you all, is, you're talking about affordability, the importance of affordability, and then, like I said, a 2-unit building comes on and it's $1.2 million in a community that 20 years ago, nobody wanted to buy anything for more than $350,000. And people are like, you promised us affordability. This isn't affordable. And that's just a hard conversation to have with communities, that like production needs to come online. I do think that you should be careful about restricting things to that you want to get built in the private market to affordability without really working through the numbers. I think inclusionary zoning, like you guys have in Metuchen on multifamily, like larger multifamily buildings, there's a lot more opportunity to absorb it, but you might be able to get it at affordable, like in some markets, like 5 units, like you might be able to get 1 unit in there at, you know, maybe not low income, but moderate income, but you got to kind of know your market and figure that out. But I am much more of a fan of thinking about each program or policy as really focused on a core issue, and that missing middle is about housing choice and options. And there are a lot of other strategies, including subsidies, rent controls, and other ways of managing the affordable issue, because otherwise it gets really tricky, and you can run into a place where you can essentially set up affordability requirements that mean nothing's going to get built. And that just puts us right back into the same problem that we've been in for now, 20 years. And I don't know, Chris, if you want to talk about.
Not much to add, other than helped write the ordinance in Princeton back in 2018. It was a combination of the neighborhood of character ordinance to really address the Valley Road subdivision, if you remember, and that sort of spearheaded effort. We got to get the garage way in the back and the porch forward, and we were tasked to look at making sure the infill housing just fit in better into the residential streetscape of established neighborhoods. And we simultaneously did a stab at an ADU ordinance, which is effectively taking the former borough and former township ordinances, merging together with the best practice from AARP. And I think we sort of hand-delivered that to the municipality of Princeton and said, we think you should do this. You're going to be one of the first towns to do so. I thought at the time, I think Asbury Park or Maplewood might have had one already. But when I handled it to Princeton, it kind of sat for a little bit. And I think there was a case or the threat of a case regarding the ownership occupancy issue. And I think once they put that away and just did an ADU ordinance, that was put in place. And I think there's been almost like 3 or 4 dozen ADUs built in Princeton, which is great, which is mainly the issue of addressing housing choice. It certainly doesn't address the affordability issues. I think there's many examples where you have what was a $1.2 million house becomes 2 $800,000 condominiums. Well, we didn't address the affordability issues, but at least we addressed an issue of housing diversity and housing choice. But I agree. I think it needs to be a combination of things, like looking at duplexes and triplexes and quads and rent controls. So it's a combination of things, but it needs to be done carefully. One thing I would add to your list is perhaps 3 and 4 families should be exempt from site plan. Just a thought.
Oh, yeah. We talked about that in our meeting.
Okay, good.
Can I ask a quick question about the interplay between New Jersey's affordable housing requirements, which hits many communities, not Newark and some of the, well, they do, but it's different, and the types of housing that's built? Because I think we are seeing multifamily as the easy way to meet, not easy way to have developers subsidize the creation of affordable units. And perhaps the decline in missing middle is a market issue, or is it it's a zoning and a market issue? I mean, just curious about that.
I mean, I see it a lot as a zoning issue. I mean, I think you do. I think if you look in the guide, there's some case studies in there. Metuchen's a really great example of this. So many historic communities in New Jersey are great examples of missing middle communities where you've got 1s and 2s and 4s and 5s mixed in with some apartments and things. And I mean, I would be really interested to dig in more and learn more, especially from the developer community, about what the unit thresholds you would really need to get to have affordability as part of like a 5-unit project or a 4-unit project, and like what role could local government play in some of that to push that over the edge? Because I mean, Chris, we've talked about this, is like there is, I think, apartment fatigue, right? Like there is like another apartment building, another box, another thing. I think it plays an important role. It's undersupplied in New Jersey. That's why there's so much demand. But I think we are going to be looking in 20 years back in the way that we sort of look at like the garden apartments, and they're just like everywhere. And it's like, where did those come from? It's like, oh, they have a history. We're going to have that same condition. So.
I was just going to add that I think that kind of like a basic thought, I think, is that affordable housing or housing affordability is still real estate. And so no matter how we look at it, there's got to be, we're going to build something or preserve something or rehab something, right? But there's a cost to it. And the minute there's an affordability requirement, it changes the bottom lines. And so that's why it's great when you have like states like New Jersey that have programs that are able to provide equity and tax credits and long-term financing to build mixed income housing. And that does help to underwrite some of the affordable units if you have market plus you have public funding. In Newark, we have that too. So we have some gap funding. We also have tax incentives, and we do sell land at a deep discount. And so I think that when we think about it, it's about making sure we understand, I think, at least from my perspective, that it's still a real estate transaction. So you got to look at it from every aspect that touches real estate, whether it's zoning, whether it's financing, whether it's community engagement, whether it's politics. I mean, all of that is a factor. And so I think that for figuring it out is that I think it is the conversation back to that. I mean, I just don't think people know what the missing middle is. And well, now I'm just going to give myself up. But anyways, I wasn't sure either. So I thought it was like I was thinking missing middle from like about 10 years ago in my head, which was like 80 to 120% of AMI. So when I first was thinking about the presentation, I was like going to work on that part. And then we had this wonderful prepping, thank goodness. And I'm like, oh, this is great. This is even easier because it's a lot of what Newark does. So I say that with sincerity because I think that that's part of the issue too, is that I just don't know if people understood it as well. I think they may have been defining it differently. So
I will just add, I think there is a lot of overlap between the missing middle affordability and the missing middle product thing. And one thing that I think is always also worth paying attention to, I haven't done this as much in New Jersey, looked at it more in the Pennsylvania side, but a lot of communities in that side of the river have had a lot of their like starter homes cannibalized into large large single family housing. So what ends up happening is like your naturally occurring affordable is being eaten at the bottom, and it's being pulled up to the top at these like ridiculous prices, which is pulling the market up. And is really, I think, hurting a lot of those like 80 to 120, families who aren't going to qualify for a subsidized, unit and can't afford the really expensive homes and just have no entry level into the marketplace. So one thing that I think is always worth doing is like look at your zoning and think about bringing down your bulk standards. Like if you have a community that is 1- and 2-story ranch homes, why are you permitting 3-story single family homes at 5,000 square feet? I don't have the slide here, but if you go into the guide, you'll see a picture of the progression of like the typical suburban home from like Levittown till now. I'll admit, I'm on Instagram, I watch the reels, like I see people talk about, my grandparents could buy, their home for whatever on a year's salary. Go look at the homes that they were buying. They were tiny compared to a modern home. So when we talk about housing choice and things, like one thing I think is really important is we are also gonna have to start adjusting our ideas about what is an acceptable living situation. And did you mention college kids living at home? Like, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's not a social stigma for a while, and it's okay to be 28 living at home in your dad's basement. This is not a personal story about my life and how it's not or like maybe it's okay to, when you first buy your home, you still have a roommate, right? And you're still renting a place or an accessory dwelling unit, like as you start to, again, not a personal life story. Like, you know, like these are things that I think we have to start adjusting around and thinking about as we start to think about housing, that it can't just be more of the same.
Can I jump in there briefly?
Okay, we do want to open it up to the
Okay, it'll be real quick. Okay. So yeah, we did rent a bedroom out for the first 2 years of our mortgage. Didn't love it, but you know. Reducing bulk standards in single-family zones, I think, makes sense if you're going to rebuild it as a single-family home. You know, the exception could be, well, if you're going to build 2 or 3 units, then keep that initial envelope, because otherwise you're not allowing that to happen, right?
But what you actually can do is set separate bulk standards for separate unit types.
Yes.
And what you've got to do in some ways is disincentivize the scrape and rebuilds. Because that's like, even if you bring it down, even if they're rebuilding at single family homes, you know, the reality is when you bring the bulk standards down, there's no incentive to rebuild. There's incentive to add, reconfigure, go through that process rather than, and then say, well, if you want 2, you can do a little bit bigger. You want 3, maybe put 1 out back. Yeah, we're on the same page on that.
All right. Yes.
Oh, no, I've got the mic.
Oh, Megan has control, sorry.
Hi, my name is Thomas Lopez Pierre. I'm from New York City. I manage a social impact private equity fund. We raise capital exclusively from Black accredited investors, lawyers, doctors, investment bankers, and then we invested exclusively with Black real estate entrepreneurs to build wealth, create jobs, and lower the incarceration rate in the Black community through economic opportunity. I have 2 points I want to make. I want to push back on the bulk, and I want to push back on affordability. Like I said, one is we just finished developing a property in Levittown, Long Island, where the house was a hut. And then my entrepreneur tore it down and built a 5,000 square foot house that was sold to a doctor for $1.35 million. Now, I would not oppose the reduction of bulk, but then we need government to lower the real estate taxes. We need the plumbers, the electricians, and the contractors to lower their prices so that the house that was a fantasy in the past could now be afforded to be built. We need insurance premiums lowered also, so that we can build that cute little tiny house that makes economic sense, but that's not the world we live in. Now, the second point I want to make is on affordability. I live in a rent-regulated apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, love rent-regulated housing. My rent can't be increased. I live in a 10-unit building. We don't have rent restrictions on 1 to 4, 1 to 5 units because that breeds the manifestation of ghettos. Because most people that if you're poor and you live in a 1 to 2, 3 family house and you can't raise the rent and you can't get market rate rent, what happens is you can't invest in new roof, plumbing, and housing over time. So the only way, and I'll finish up here, is the only way capping rents at 4% for 1 to 4, 1 to 5 makes sense, which I don't oppose. But then we need government to provide housing vouchers so that the tenants can pay a real rent, so that the landlord, the homeowner, or the investor can then borrow low-cost capital and then invest in that housing so we don't see abandonment. In New York, they capped when a tenant moves out, they cap what you can put back into the apartment, and we have tens of thousands of apartments being warehoused in New York City because the landlords can't get real rent. So that's something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Sure, just on that last piece for rent control here in Newark, there is a clause that allows for substantial rehabilitation credits and also rent changes. So we do encourage that, especially now that we're also inspecting all of those units. And so we do want them to be habitable and livable, not just affordable.
Good morning, Mark Castle from Bowman. Was there some
I just
other
want to
comment? I'm
say,
sorry.
I do think you raised a really important point, Thomas, about all of this, is really thinking about the market implications of your decision makings around this, talking with developers. They are not all evil boogeymen. all of them. Get to know what is going to work and not work in your community as sort of you've been talking about.
Sorry about that. Mark Castle from Bowman Consulting. It strikes me that housing policy is great, housing supply is great, but we need to talk more about outcomes. And that's part of the trust equation, I think. I don't know to what extent data is being generated on success stories and anecdotals for that matter. I kind of go back to what Michael talked about at the beginning with New Jersey Transit and the hope that people are riding transit. But are we collecting data that talks about that? Or are we collecting anecdotals about people riding transit or living in TOD so that we can make the case about reducing parking minimums? Are we talking about the economic value that's going into neighborhoods in the 15-minute city to say, yes, more money's being spent, more jobs are being generated? That, to me, is part of getting past the trust equation to say, we have successes. We have the same policies in place that can generate more successes as a result. So I wonder if you could comment on that thought.
I do know from a parking perspective, in Jersey, it's hard to get property owners to share the information and the utilization rate. They just hoard their own information. But there was about, 10, 15 years ago in Jersey City, there was a developer who had enough buildings himself, because it costs money to build the parking deck. And he's like, they had a requirement at that time, I think it might have been 1-to-1 or 0.75 at that time. And he's like, my decks are half empty. And so I don't want to spend the $25,000 a parking spot to have empty decks. And by the way, you're not allowed, they could only be used for the residential. You can't like rent them out. Yeah, you weren't allowed to rent them out either. So they were so they actually, did their own utilization study and shared that. And the other problem though is it actually wasn't the city that was the hard time. It was the financing. The financer said, you need this much parking to make this sustainable. And so they did the data. But I think it really is hard. They keep that stuff to the chest unless it impacts their financing.
So, hi, Stephanie again. I'm going to agree with Courtney. What the research has shown thus far is that in many locations, we are still building too much parking, and that the problem is the financing, that the underwriters haven't come around to the idea that they shouldn't be building nearly as many units of parking as we have been building in the past. That they are in certain locations, those parking spaces have not been used. And so you're artificially increasing the price of the product. And really what we need to be thinking about is separating the cost of parking and the cost of units in larger multifamily projects. I also wanted to mention, someone said something about the research, I think it was you. Rutgers completed a study not that long ago, it hasn't been released yet, where we both surveyed and talked to people living in transit-served locations, and to find out about how they were operating within their community, whether or not they were riding transit, what value they put on the transit that was placed nearby or was located in their neighborhoods and things like that. And what we found overall, if I remember everything correctly, is that people really value the transit, even if they're not taking it every day, and most people aren't taking it every day anymore. We know we've experienced this profound shift in how people interact with transit, but that it being there is still highly valuable, even if they are not using it all the time. They are using it discretionarily, if that's the right word. They're using it for their pleasure trips. They're using it for some work trips, and that they have chosen to locate in places where they can access it, and they still feel like it is a added value to where they live. I think the thing that we have to be thinking about as we're in this transitional period is that we have to talk about, or we have to work on making the value of the places where they are as good as the places that they would travel to, that both ends of the trip need to be very valuable in order to make a transit-friendly system work well. And so long as we're doing that, even if they're not using the transit quite as much as they had been using it in the past, it still remains very part of that whole environment in which they're purchasing when they move, or renting when they select their place. So, and I hope that report can be out soon. So,
Any other questions?
Hi, Valerie Merritt, Communications and Press Manager with New Jersey Future. This question is actually for Allison, because I know you touched on the trust issue. I was born and raised in Newark. I love Newark. I will always love Newark, no matter what my zip code is. So how do you, or how does the city of Newark rebrand itself so that the community will trust Newark? My mom purchased her first home in this great city when she was 50 years old. She's about to be 75 this year. Another woman who loves this city, and she does not want to leave. But for folks who don't live here, who always degrade this city, who nothing has happened to since they've been coming and working here, how do you rebrand that so you can speak to what you know versus what you assume?
Well, don't give me any softballs. It's okay. I'm not sure I know. I think that's one of the toughest parts of what we do as leaders in any community, is find a way to keep people engaged. So I think I'll just share a couple things, because these are things that surprised me in a good way when I came to work here. This mayor, different than some of the other mayors and elected officials I've worked for, is about the people. And he would periodically send me a note that he got on Instagram and say, could you just follow up and find out what they're looking for? And I was like, sure, but who is it? Because it was like a handle, right? It's a person's handle, no phone number, no address, no email, just could you work this out, right? And I think that helped keep some people engaged, is that the leader himself was engaged. Now, I'm not gonna say other leaders aren't like that, I just mean that here. That's one thing. I think the second part is that you focus on programs that help families that wanna stay here. And so he's increased our renovation program for homeowners in the city. I think now it started at 15, we went to 20, and now we're at $40,000. And it's a forgivable grant. Forgivable loan. So essentially a grant, no interest. And so we're seeing mostly seniors in our city take advantage of that. And the interesting fact that I found in that is that the income or the asset value that the family has is usually less than the amount that we're providing them to do renovations. I think that says a lot. And people who are accessing these programs are $25,000, $30,000. Is what their incomes are, but they're accessing $40,000 to put a new roof on, to improve their driveway, to get new windows. I think it's something that you have to do. I think the last part I'll say is I think that you have to want to keep residents here. I think we often find a time where developers, I'll just say that, are trying to do something that is good for business, but maybe not good for the people or the community. And so it's really up to whoever is running that city and the people that they hire to focus on the community that lives there. And it's definitely easier said than done, but I also think that's why, and I'll end with, I think that's why he wanted to change the rent control rule. Because a lot of our Newark residents live in rent control, and a lot of the rent control units are not owner occupied, or the 4 units and smaller were not owner occupied. So I think it's incremental, but I don't think that there's. I think he was here. He would tell you something else, but you got me. But I think that that's probably what I would say. So thanks.
And then we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name's Frank. I'm a planner with NJTPA. And I did have a question for Allison. I kind of, not to throw all these questions at you, but I know that the city of Newark does own a lot of land. And
Yes.
yeah, from my knowledge, I believe that a good portion of this ownership came after the 2008 financial crisis. So I'm curious to just know, what is the city doing to transition home ownership to, residents, to people who are, looking to get their starter home, or to our generation that's trying to, build that equity and build that wealth? I've been a bit curious because you guys own so much land, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great question. So the first thing is we were grateful that the governor passed the land bank legislation. And so Newark was able to really work through the operations of the land bank, and as well as now been able to operate programs out of it. Our land bank actually is one of the higher producers, I think, of affordable housing that's home ownership. One great program that they do is Section 8 home ownership. Family self-sufficiency for some others that may have heard it that way, where, basically they buy city-owned property, they renovate it, and then they're selling it to a lottery-selected winner who is on Section 8 and has been eligible to use their voucher for a mortgage. And that's been really a one way. Now, I think the biggest issue we have with that is volume. It's hard to do that at scale. So we're doing it and we're happy, but it's not at like the hundreds that we wish we could do it at. The second part I'd say, though, is that they also are doing home ownership programs that are for more moderate income individuals. So they're trying to do the spectrum and the continuum of housing, not only one end of housing, which I think is important for us to do as well. And so I think those are two ways in which we've been doing that. I will say I think we can do a better job. And so I'll just end by, we always talk about affordability and rental housing here in Newark, because 78% of our residents rent. And so that's who our population we serve often. But when we say that, we also know that there's a lot of people who would rather own. So the mayor just started looking at ways for us to invest in home ownership through gap financing, the way we do for rental housing. And so we're hopeful we'll be able to come out with an announcement about that, because that would also help people who might be middle income be able to afford in the market that continues to grow in price. So thanks.
He lives with his parents.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, so I just wanted to give the reality. You can't be a single mother with kids, so you won't get that benefit.
So I'm Megan Massey, Director of Transit-Friendly Planning. I really appreciate you all coming out today for this really great conversation. Very passionate. I love the interplay between everyone on the panel. We'll be sending out a survey after this just to get your feelings on the topic, what you want to hear more through the NJTOD.org series, the location. Hopefully this was a plus for many of you. And I just wanted to do a little plug for the planning conference. It's June 13th, Friday, in person at the Hyatt in New Brunswick. Transit-Friendly Planning, along with others, are going to be doing a panel on the Route 9 TOD vision plan. It will also be discussing missing middle, transit-oriented development around a bus corridor. That is a thing. That should be something that we should be focusing more on. And so please join us if you are in the New Brunswick area. And then anything else? This was great. I know some of you are probably wondering, why is transit involved in this conversation? But it is really about transit-oriented development, creating a mix of uses, housing choices around transit, and supporting increased ridership along the way. So thank you again for attending, and please, friends, families, get bagels, because I ordered way too many. So thank you.